hugely anticipated budget and huge pressure on the ministers to deliver something that will placate families and businesses.
Yeah, and they're spending more money than they originally advertised. Not 6.7 billion in the budget, 6.9. The one-off package will not be 3 billion, it'll be 4 billion. So clearly there has been pressure over recent weeks exerted on the government to spend more money than they initially indicated that they would. But they're also...
We're going to have to leave it there, Paul, because the minister is just getting to his feet.
Budget 2023 to this House. When we gathered in this chamber for Budget 2022, we were emerging from the very worst of the COVID-19 pandemic. We now face a further economic challenge. If you are an older person, you're having to spend more of your pension on heating your home. If you're looking after your family, you are now facing higher grocery bills. And if you're running a small business, you are trying to cope with the increases in the cost of energy. This is why Budget 2023, presented by Minister McGrath and I today, is and must be a cost of living budget, focused on helping individuals, families and businesses deal with rising prices. As we have seen all too clearly over the past few years, with Brexit, with COVID and now with the war in Ukraine, unforeseen risks and challenges are becoming more frequent in their occurrence and more severe in their impact. As one of the most open economies in the world, we benefit when things are going well internationally, but when they reverse, we are also one of the most exposed. And as such, it is imperative that we are prepared for these shocks. Our recovery from the pandemic is testimony to the value of that preparation. We faced the pandemic with our finances in good shape, and this ensured we could both respond and recover in its aftermath. Therefore, Budget 2023 helps with the challenges of today, but will also ensure that we have sufficient reserves for what the future may bring. And we must also be aware of the danger of making inflation worse by decisions that we could take. The onset of the war in Ukraine has sent shockwaves throughout the global economy, and this is most evident in energy and commodity markets, where prices surged at the onset of the war and have remained high. Energy price inflation intensified over the summer as concerns grew regarding a complete shutdown of Russian gas supplies. The wholesale price of natural gas is now around 8 times its average level in the years preceding the war. The inflationary pressures from energy have been further compounded by the imbalance between demand and supply that emerged as economies reopened. Consumers released substantial pent-up demand as restrictions were eased, while supply chain bottlenecks prevented firms from keeping up with that demand. So, as a result of these factors, headline inflation in Ireland, similar to many other economies, is now running at highs not seen in many decades. My department now updates its forecasts to headline inflation of 8.5% for 2022 and just over 7% for 2023. Non-energy, or so-called core inflation, is also experiencing high levels of growth, suggesting effects from energy and commodities to other sectors, such as food, consumer goods and services. So I am now revising our forecasts for core inflation to 5.25% for this year and just over 4.5% for next. And these developments reflect the increasingly broad-based nature of our inflationary challenge. The pace of growth in the economy is expected to slow throughout the rest of the year, as mounting inflationary pressures reduce our ability to spend. So this will see firms hold back on investment. And as a result, my department is now revising down its forecast for modified domestic demand, which is the most appropriate measure of our own domestic economy, to 1.25% for next year. Let me, Ceann Comhairle, acknowledge that these are not just abstract economic figures. The government understands, and I understand, the worries which small business owners, farmers, pensioners, those who work so hard to get by feel. And that is why the government will help, and by helping our country, we will overcome this challenge. And we can do this because our economy has strong foundations. Due to the immense work of the Irish people, the labour market has made a remarkable recovery over the past year, with well over 2.5 million people in employment in the second quarter, the highest level on record, and an unemployment rate of 4.3% in August. And looking ahead, while we do expect employment growth to slow, in line with the changes in our outlook for domestic demand, we also expect the unemployment rate to remain at relatively low levels. So while the war in Ukraine poses the most immediate threat to our economy, we remain vigilant of other risks on the horizon. Notably, Brexit could yet bring further challenges. And this is why our public finances matter. They have recovered strongly from the effects of the pandemic, and much of this recovery is due to the careful management of this government in undertaking appropriate responses to the unique challenges that our country faced. The recovery in tax receipts is broad-based. At the end of August, tax revenue stood at almost €50 billion, up by over €10 billion in 2021. Income tax continues to perform well and reflects the resilience of our jobs market, of our people, and the success of the government's employment schemes during the pandemic. The strong performance of VAT receipts confirms the rebound in consumer spending once public health restrictions were lifted. So as a result, I can announce to the House that we will register a general government surplus of €1 billion, or just under 0.5% of national income for this year, and €6.2 billion, or 2.25% for next year. To put these figures in context, last year we recorded a general government deficit of €7 billion. This is extremely welcome news. However, the headline figures don't account for the fact that much of the change is due to excess corporate tax. These receipts could change significantly in the future. They now amount to €12 billion at the end of August, and we expect these receipts to exceed €20 billion by the end of the year. And I will return to this point shortly. It is essential that we use our surpluses wisely. We should not spend everything today. This will ensure that we are ready for tomorrow. It's what we did before COVID arrived. It worked, and this is what we must do again. Because of this, we could help during COVID. Because of this, the government can help again today. And while conditions have been favourable to us in recent years, the government of course notes that borrowing costs for countries have also changed significantly since the start of the year and are now rising. The yield on 10-year government bonds, that's the rate of interest, has increased now by over 2 percentage points since January. So while markets continue to view our bonds, our debt favourably, we know how quickly things can change. The best way to be safe, the best way to insulate our public finances from the higher cost of debt is to ensure that our borrowing remains aligned, is in line with other small, open EU member states, which is what we are doing. And while the department's economic projections do envisage a softening in economic growth for next year, due to the phasing out of our exceptional COVID supports and the upward revisions in our tax forecasts, we are now in a strong position. If we continue to follow our current strategy, we should see a stabilisation of public debt at approximately €225 billion. It's also important to acknowledge that on a per-person basis, public debt amounts to around €44,000 per capita. This is one of the highest figures in the world. However, we will achieve a continued decline in our debt to national income ratio over the coming years by delivery of these surpluses, and by 2025 this ratio is projected to be 73%, which is the lowest level for our country since 2009. We simply do not know what we could face in the future. When we face these challenges, I believe we will prevail, and a crucial economic foundation of this is managing our debt safely. It matters. So managing our public finances allowed the government to act swiftly and decisively to provide support to households and businesses. We're especially mindful of the fact that the rising cost of living has hit hardest for those on the lowest incomes. So, in drafting Budget 2023, the government is aware of our responsibility to strike a balance between helping with the cost of living pressures, but on the other hand, not making them worse by adding fuel to the inflationary fire. The summer economic statement set out the parameters for this budget, as well as our medium-term budgetary framework. And in response to the increase in energy and other prices, the government amended our budgetary strategy for 2023 to double the size of our tax package and to increase public expenditure in order to protect the real value of public services.